Hey, welcome back to the Woodshed. Today we are back to talking about polytemporal footwork. And so what I wanted to do is basically ask the question, how can you play footwork at 160 beats per minute, but at 170 beats per minute? How can you play one tempo at another tempo? Well, basically, if you treat this as polytemporal rather than just, a separate tempo, then we can start to create these relationships that are harmonic relationships, much like you would see in just intonation or polyrhythms, etc. So let's get into how we would go about this. Our reference tempo basically is 160 beats per minute. That's life at 160 beats per minute is like sort of the mentality here. But of course, if we do an octave of that tempo up or down, it's going to in many ways be the same tempo. And so this is basically 320 beats per minute for the eighth note, 640 for the 16th note. We don't really think about tempo this way though. Like 640 beats per minute isn't a real tempo. I mean, sure it is, but like nobody's thinking like that. To me, I feel like less than 200 is reasonable. If you get up beyond that, it's like might as well divide it by two. So, even 160 is like that's kind of high, and maybe some people would have an easier time perceiving of this at 80 beats per minute. It's not that it's a different tempo. It's just like they're counting the half note instead of the quarter note. So similarly, we could go further down to 40 beats per minute. And if we're saying 4/4 is 160 and then 2/2 is 80, then 1/1, which is much like a fundamental in just intonation, that would be 40 beats per minute. So I'm going to use this as our sort of tonic or like our fundamental tone here for our tempos for most of this. So next thing that I would ask is basically how long in duration is each of those pulses of a whole note. So for a measure of 4/4 or 2/2 or 1/1 at this tempo, how long does it take for that bar to elapse? And so, if you think about it, 40 beats per minute, that means for every 60 seconds, it's going to have 40 even pulses. So that means each full bar at 40 beats per minute for the whole note is going to be 1.5 seconds. Now, of course, this is an absolute duration, and it's not really as nice of a way to think about it a lot of the time, but it does put things into a very clear perspective for the composer or whoever's working on this, because you start to hit thresholds. Basically anything below 100 milliseconds is going to be pretty fast and like hard to really do a good job of accurately as a human who's probably performing on some sort of instrument. As a machine that's quantized and mechanical entirely, it's going to be a lot easier. But so we know that our whole note is basically 1.5 seconds or 1500 milliseconds. Now let me ask the question, if we just took this whole scheme and switched it to 170 beats per minute, what would happen? So we still have 1/1, but it's at 170. So that's 2/2 or 4/4 or 16/16, but at 170 beats per minute. Well, basically, you're going to get a fundamental tempo then that is 17 over 16 times 40. So that puts at 42.5 beats per minute. And similarly, if we think about it as a duration, it's going to be 16 over 17 times that 1.5. So that means our duration is basically 1.41 something rather seconds. Cool. So when we do this, it basically means that we are no longer really doing much that's related to any sort of aspect of that tempo scheme of 160 and 40. It's playing the 17th harmonic of that 40 fundamental, but we don't have anything that's showing the fundamental anymore. It's as if our fundamental is 42.5. So what happens if we have 40 beats per minute and 170 beats per minute going at the same time? Well, this has no real problem, except that it requires that you smush an extra 16th note in. So basically you can make this line up again by doing 17/16 instead of 16/16. So you just add that extra little chunk of time that was missing. It's all still even. It's 17 units that are all even across that 1.5 seconds. Okay, so another way to write this that, just I wouldn't do this practically speaking, but it will help illustrate how one rhythm is another, is to say, if we're at 160 beats per minute, and then we do a 17/16 polyrhythm, so 17 notes evenly spaced in the space of 16 notes, then we can sort of hint at this 170 tempo, the 17th harmonic, but without shifting tempos or time signatures. But then, you have to have all this extra baggage of, putting 17:16 and this bracket thing, and it's kind of just too much to really notate and feel like you're reasonably getting away with. A little note on octave equivalence, and why basically 320 or 640 aren't interesting ways to conceive of 160 necessarily, since it's all doing the same thing, and that's all being raised to an exponent. Basically, like if we have 40 beats per minute as our fundamental, then we go to 80, then the next octave up is 160. So it's like 1, 2, 4. It's always an exponent, so it's 2 raised to some power. So it starts off 2 raised to the 0, then 2 to the 1, 2 to the 2, which is 4, 2 to the 3, 8, 2 to the 4, 16. So these are all the same thing basically with octave equivalence. But what about, for instance, if we do like a perfect fifth tempo? So if we have 80, then a perfect fifth up from that is 120. Cool. So it's basically adding 50% because it's 3/2 times your tempo. Now, you could keep on doing that, sort of get a Pythagorean thing like we talked about last time. So we went from 80 to 120, and then do it again, get to 180, do that again, get to 270, which we could reduce to 135. So that's all basically just ascending in fifths. But what if we want to keep on getting new, fresh tempo identities, basically? Well, this is where the whole idea of just intonation comes in again. And so when you do these different ratios using the natural numbers, to get rational numbers like fractions, say in this case, we're talking about like 17/16 basically. If we go to 5, then 7, 11, 13, 17, all these are prime numbers, and they have a distinct sort of pitch identity or interval identity. So 5 is going to get us our major third. You just collapse it back into the octave. So 5/4 is going to be a major third ratio. 7/4 is going to be essentially like a pure seventh. It's not something that you can hit on a piano though, because a piano is going to have it notably sharper to get that 12 tone or equal temperament basically. So once you get beyond the 5, it's like kind of like you can't really tune it with equal temperament, but we aren't even dealing with tones here, we're dealing with tempos. So that's the cool thing. This is, I think, an underappreciated fact about tuning theory, is that people don't really necessarily see that it can be applied so readily to rhythm and tempos. So much like we had 2, 4, 8, 16, we can do 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. In this case, I'm talking about 17. So now 17 is quite close to 2 raised to the 4. So, that's 16. So it's just a little bit faster. And we can treat it as pretty much the same because, we're dividing 1.5 seconds by 17 instead of 16. So what I think is interesting now is, people in Footwork will use the tempo of the triplet. They'll basically switch the quantization to 1/8 T instead of 1/8 or 1/8, or like 1/16 T instead of 1/16. But you can still kind of almost mimic the same rhythms because, like we talked about, the 3 + 3 + 2. That some people will say, oh yeah, it's a triplet because there are 3 things, but it's not evenly spaced. So, this hinting at a different tempo is sort of already being implied in this music, but I'm trying to take this a step further. So how do we imitate a rhythm that would be in 4/4 otherwise, but in 17/16. Okay, so, you know, we can basically just smush another 16th note in there somewhere. Okay, so the rhythm in 4/4 that I have is 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 4. Okay, so all you have to do really is add 1 to any of these notes, and now you're in 17, and you smush it in there basically. And so, you know, it's 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4. So what I've found personally is that basically this is adding a hiccup. And so if I added the hiccup to the very end with the 4, then it would make it a little bit more lopsided feeling, which is fine. But sometimes if you want to hide it a little bit more effectively, it's good to put it in somewhere where it's gonna not really be noticed. Like, you know, in the case of this, maybe 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 4. And so you sort of can't tell where the hiccup is until you notice that, oh shit, some time has elapsed and somehow they smushed an extra note in. I guess the tempo is a little bit faster. And so this is just an interesting technique that I like to use, and it's kind of the basis of a lot of music that I do personally. So yeah, thanks.